Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I am your host, Dancing Johari. And well, it's cold, it's winter. So naturally, I'm thinking of a dragon. Not just any dragon, mind you, a nice dragon. We have so much to do, we really need to get started. To the workstation! Welcome to my project box. And well, inside we have a doll waiting for customization. In this case, it's one of the faceless ghost ones. I forget her name. But first things first, off with her hair. Yep, that came off pretty quick. It's really fried, so I'm not going to keep it. And off with her head, so we're going to use boiling water to take it off. Sorry about my new post being so long in between. I was supposed to be back in January, but let's just say that life had other plans for me. Next, I want to, while the head is still warm, I'm going to take out all those hair plugs and, oh dear. Yep, that's a little rip you're seeing. And then there's another bigger rip up in the scalp by the hairline. At this point, I began to question my choice of doll. And I just began to check to see if there's any other tears I didn't know about. Hey, I'm wondering if I chose wisely in my choice of doll.
Why?
There's a rip there. And a rip there.
So what?
That's what I said. Sadly, this is just the way it is with older dolls sometimes. They find damage that you didn't expect to find. Next, I'm going to take off all the factory paint with pure acetone. So I'm going to start with the scalp. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the face. She's got such a sweet expression. I can't wait to get started on her face up, but there's a lot to do first. You see, I'm in the mood for an ice dragon. I've been in the mood to make an ice dragon for a while. But in the meantime, let's put the head aside and start the body modifications. In pure delightful style, I took out my Dremel and just began hacking off limbs. Well, not all of the limbs. We're just going to take off, we're just going to remove her legs from the mid-shin down and her thighs from the middle thigh or so up. I'm going to be giving her some extra joints here. The reason being I want her to look like she's got two joints, like a double knee. This way she'll sit more like a dragon. Now that we've got all that done, well... it's time to start on putting her back together, so to speak. So first, I drilled holes into both thighs, into the center of both thighs. The idea is to put the original knee at an 90-degree angle from where it was. So for that, we're going to have to put wires in. So I went ahead and drilled through both of her knees. Took a length of wire, fed it through. Then I twisted it up, trimmed it, and shoved it back in. Once I was happy with the way they were looking, I went ahead and secured them with hot glue. This will keep them from moving around a whole lot, but we're going to do more than that. We need to fill in the space, so in the meantime, we have more holes to drill. So I went ahead and drilled through the top of the shins, and unfortunately at one point, I did get stuck. Then I took some popsicle sticks, marked where I wanted holes to be drilled, and marked how long I wanted them. I did this to both ends of all three popsicle sticks. We're going to need 6 of these. Now where I marked it with dots, I go ahead and drilled some holes. Then where the lines were, I went ahead and cut them off with my Dremel. It was just the easiest, quickest way to do it. Now we're going to secure those thighs in place. So I mixed up Apoxy Sculpt 50-50 and secured them in and let it cure. Once everything was cured, I came back to the project. I went ahead and put a little groove in each of the pieces for the legs. drilled more holes because I realized, oops, that's right, I need to use more wire to help secure these things into place. And for some reason, I decided to remove the toes. In retrospect, I should have left them as they were. They would have helped me to get a better foot position. Oh well. Oops. Hindsight being, 2020. I went ahead and I realized I needed more holes on the bottom of the popsicle sticks to help secure them in place. And I glued them in with hot glue. Then secured them with some wire. More jewelry wire, rather. I fed it through the hole in the shin, then fed one end through the hole in the popsicle stick, and used the other one to wrap it around until it was nice and secure. Fortunately, these joints aren't going to be reliant completely on that, because there will be Apoxy Sculpt added later. Next, I did more grooves, glued in more popsicle sticks, this time 2 on the other end. This is going to be a joint, so it's going to need a little bit of extra support. Then I fed the jewelry wire through, just like I did with the single ones, and wrapped it around, leaving space, of course, for the other popsicle stick to slide in between. And of course, trimmed the ends of my wires. Once that was all done, I secured that joint with a nut and bolt, putting the bolt towards the outside and the nut on the outside, bolt on the inside. Sorry. Next, I used a couple blobs of Apoxy Sculpt to cover the bolts, just like Delightful does when she does these kinds of joints. And then I did a snake of epoxy around the screw. This way they'll still be accessible later if I ever need to adjust anything. And yes, I know, I shouldn't be doing this with my bare hands, but the gloves were just in the way. Once I had the snakes where I wanted them, I used a silicone sculpting tool to help me make sure that the epoxy sculpt was pushed back just enough, and of course to make sure that there's no epoxy in between the joint. We don't want it freezing in place. Once that was all cured, I went ahead and sculpted over the popsicle sticks and over the wires to hide them. There we go. Now those look like legs again. Yay! They're not perfect by any means, but I'll be adding more epoxy later to finish that off. Next, I drilled holes in the toes and the heels. We're going to give her some toes after all. Dragon toes, which means claws. Originally, I wanted to do the kinds of claws that would be movable, articulated. So I went ahead and put twists of wire into each of the into place for each of the toe beans, and then I went ahead on the back toes, went ahead and sculpted her back claws out of Polygel. It's like a hybrid of gel and acrylic. Really cool stuff. You have to cure it in order to get it to harden. Then I went ahead and just continued sculpting on the legs. Added wires through the soft epoxy sculpt on the toes. And then put it aside to cure. When I came back, I went ahead and shaped and trimmed all of the wires for the toes, or claws. At this point, the toes are sculpted. Now let's give her some claws. I went ahead and did polygel for the rest of her toe beans, and then added more epoxy sculpting around them to make them look like they're actually part of her foot and growing out of it. That's looking pretty good. And of course I added epoxy sculpt to her thighs, her hips, finished off the legs. Now let's address the hands. The hands were a little too small, so I gave her a different set of hands from Abominable. Then I poked a hole into each finger and added a wire. These will be the supports for her claws. I went ahead and added polygel to each of these and cured it. Taking my time, trying to get as close to a claw shape as I could. Once they were cured, I went ahead and rubbed them down with alcohol and check their shape. That's pretty good. They're a little bulky, but we're going to be sanding them later. Next, I turn my attention to belly scales. Now this, I don't recommend. If you want to use some sort of nail product to do your belly scales, I suggest acrylic, because as I was doing all these modifications at one point, things broke. You'll see when. But before I cured each scale, I went ahead and used pen to add some details. Cured each scale one at a time so I didn't squish something else by accident. Then did her breastplate scales. So far, so good, right? I went ahead and cured this up to her neck, then went ahead and did the back scales, and then I did scales for her sides too. As I was doing the side scales, that's when tragedy struck. The hips joint broke. For now, I went ahead and turned my attention to her horns. Yes, she's going to have dragon horns. And I want these to look like they're made out of ice, so I added wires to her head and started using Polygel and layering and curing in between each layer. I went ahead and sculpted those out of Polygel. And of course cured in between each layer until I was happy. Once everything was cured, I rubbed it down with some alcohol. Now let's get out the Apoxy Sculpt again and start fixing those legs. First, I put some Apoxy Sculpt to fix the hip joint. Well, sorta, to fix the pelvic area. Then I added detailing to her arms and fingers, building them up until the hands looked the right size to match the feet. Next, after the Apoxy Sculpt was cured, I went ahead and worked on sanding, and I tried to use S-hooks and wires. I ended up just using jewelry wire in the end. The S-hooks did not fit. But I secured those in with Polygel as well. Why? Why not? It would blend in. It would be one less thing to worry about, and I wouldn't have to worry about drying time, just curing time. Plus, once those wires are in, they're not going anywhere. Then I used my Dremel to sand down the Apoxy Sculpt. And while I was at it, I drilled a hole and added the armature for her tail. It's a ball and joint armature, just like the kind I use for my mermaid dolls. Then I used a bit of elastic, fed it through both wires, sewed it as tight as I could, and those hips are still loose. Oh well. At least she's back together again, right? Using Polygel, I also gave her nice big dragon ears, and then using gel polish, I went ahead and started on the detailing for her horns. I want them to look like ice, so that means they need to look shiny, and I want them to look kind of sparkly too, like they're magical, you know? She is a dragon. Unfortunately, some things are still wide open gap-wise, so I went ahead and used a little Uhu Glue to close up the gaps in her scalp. Then I went ahead and rerouted her. I added some Galaxy Glue to secure the plugs into place, and switched it around with the brush. I used Lavendar Smoke for the color of her hair. Now it's time for batting. So I wrapped batting around her tail, keeping in mind of how thick I was going for it. And then I sewed some white stretchy material, basically called performance fabric, over the tail. Then I secured the ends of the fabric into place on the body and at the tip of her tail, which has a Polygel tip that I had made for a previous project, and it was left over, so I was like, why not? Next, I'm going to heat up her head and put it back on her body, because we're going to paint her, all of her. Unfortunately, now I can't, now that things have happened and there's a lot of Apoxy Sculpt, we're going to have to paint her. Otherwise, things are going to look very wonky and mishmashed. So next is the hair burrito. I secured the hair up in a scrap of scrap cloth, secured it in place with pins, and of course, a hair tie. I primed her with my airbrush, but then my airbrush decided it wanted a vacation. So taking Vallejo air paints, I went ahead and brushed those on by hand. Luckily, they were thin enough that 2 coats, you don't see the brush strokes at all. I did the same to the tail, which ended up looking kind of like a tie-dye tail, which I really liked. And hung her up to dry. After she was fully dry, I gave her 2 coats of Mr. Super Clear. She's looking pretty good. And yes, I did include a gradient. But let's bring out some of those details with a nice wash. Nice dark wash. And then, of course, let's do some shadowing and highlighting over the scales. So, shadowing along the bottom of the scale and then highlighting along the top. I ended up using more of a lighter blue than the skin color was. I just added the same color to some white, and that was it. That's all I needed. The white was just too bright otherwise. Did the same for her gradient areas and for her hands and her feet. Okay, front's done. And I went ahead and added some stripes to her face and let her dry. After getting the back done, wow, it's time for her face up. So I started blushing. I did like the way those top stripes came out on her forehead. One stripe I liked, the other one not so much. And I want a little bit more of a gradient between the 2 skin tones at the top, so I went ahead and used my oil-free eyeshadows to achieve that. I also blushed over her cheeks with a dark purple and gave it a little more detailing, but I also wanted it to look kind of crisp in that area too, so. Once I got those side stripes to where I wanted them, I think I was going for a tribal aspect. I went ahead and used a kneaded eraser to clean up where I didn't want the powder to show. All right, time for a coat of Mr. Super Clear after this little bit of blushing to her lips. And to her eyelids. At this point, I was just so jazzed to finally be doing her face up. All those body mods took forever, and this is part of the reason why it's taken me so long. This whole doll took me well over a month. I started sketching out the shape of the eyes. As I said, between life and, let's see, kids got sick, I got sick. So I had to take a lot of breaks from this doll as a result throughout January and even into February. So I really do apologize, guys. I know you guys have been waiting for a while. I decided the lighter look on the lips was not giving me the vibe I wanted, so I went ahead and gave her gothic black lips. Well, not full goth. It's a gradient between black and gray. And I started sketching out the eyeliner. But yeah, if you're wondering why this took so long, well, a lot of it was the mods took several weeks by themselves. And while the normal stuff takes its own time, so of course, I just really overestimated how quickly I could get this done. I think I really challenged myself a little too much this time around, so hopefully I won't be doing a huge project like this for another couple months probably. I'll probably do something a little easier for the next one. I went ahead and made her eye whites, not white, but purple. And I made her eyes white. I went ahead and sketched them out and darkened out the edges of those with black. She has a dragon. She can have an unusual eye color, right? At least I think so. After another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I went ahead and started on adding more color, particularly to the eyes. To get those white and not blue, we're going to have to work on that a bit. I also sketched out the way I really wanted those stripes to go a little bit better. and added more details with a black watercolor pencil to her lips. Trying to get the shapes just right. I like the inside color of the lip, just I wanted to give some good contrast in those. And well, I just continue to build up contrast and color at the tops of the eyes, in the eyes, and sketched in her eyebrows. This is one of those projects that took a while, but it was just worth it in the end. Once I had the shape sketched out, I filled them in and gave one eyebrow one more try. It wasn't quite right. It didn't quite match. That looks better. And well, after another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I switched to gouache to finish the eyes. I just wasn't getting the right amount of color or contrast with pencils, so that was when I made the decision to switch to gouache. Gouache is like a solid jelly-like watercolor, by the way. You can reactivate it with water unless you put a nice good coat of Mr. Super Clear in between. After that, it's protected. But I use that to add in the fangs as well, although I ended up just keeping one. It didn't look right with both, and I even tried doing the across thing, and it just... Now in retrospect, it looked better than I thought it did, I guess. But I decided just to keep one in the end. I also added in highlights to the eyebrows. I also added more details to the stripes, shading and whatnot. I also added a little bit of stars. And just kept building up the color. After another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I just kept building. This was one of those projects that took a while because I was winging it without much of a plan. And those eyes just, I love them, but something isn't right about them. So I tried adding in details with my pencil. Then decided I didn't like it and tried to erase, which didn't work very well. I added in the pupils, which of course are going to be slits. Decided I didn't like it, painted over it, and uh-oh, they're not as white, but I liked the gradient that's got going on. Let's do it on the other side. Exact same thing. First, we're going to make a pupil, then we're going to erase the pupil with some gouache, which makes it match the other side. Now let's try to add some more details now that that's dry. Much better. I like that pupil placement a little bit better on that side. And try to bring back some of the delicacy of some of the details, including putting in a little bit of a highlight, particularly around the pupil. Don't want to make it look like everything's just blended together. And I just kept building up on contrast and shadows.
I can take you where you want to go. All my clothes fly. Call me JetBlue. I'm finna take off. Call me JetBlue. I'm in the air. You still walking. Miss
also put in a little bit more color contrast for the waterline using a little bit of blue. Darker blue, of course. Still gouache, but still fun. Gotta repeat on the other side too. At this point, I decided that the pupils and everything was just looking way too big, so I redrew the eye shape a little bit, and I like how it came out a lot better. Plus, I used a little bit of mica powder to add some more details, which are very subtle but nice. Once she had had another coat or two of Mr. Super Clear and was all dry, I added some Dragonfly Glaze. This made her look sparkly all over, which is what I was going for. I mean, she's an ice dragon. I would expect she would be sparkly, you know. Of course, on the lips, I didn't use Dragonfly Glaze. I just used a little bit of liquitex gloss varnish. Now that that's all done, it's time to take the hair down from the hair burrito. Wow, this came out wild. Let's calm it a lot with a boil wash. So first I got it all rearranged the way I wanted it to, and hit it with some boiling hot water. This will help the fibers to settle down into the wear and lay the way they should be. And then I began removing elastics, carefully combing out her hair, and I gave her a hairstyle and a trim. I decided to give her, that I was going to give her bangs to hide where the glue was for the Uhu on this hairline. I just figured just a little bit of bangs, maybe. But her bangs didn't want to lay down all the way, and I didn't want to cover up all that hard work I did on the top of her forehead. I mean, it looks so nice. Taking a minute, I went ahead and gave her some braids to help the ears show a little bit more. Then I gave her a trim. I was going for a bit of a Farrah Fawcett, almost windswept look. I also added 2 braided coils of hair around the base of the horns. Alright, now it's time to address the claws. Obviously, I got paint all over them, and they're not quite the shape I wanted them to be. So, I went ahead and took out my e-file that I use for my actual nails when I give myself extensions, and my tips, and I began fixing all that. I began by removing the paint and fine-tuning the shapes, including underneath. Especially in the hard-to-reach areas, I used a very fine, tiny tip to do that. Let's do the same for the fingernails, aka finger claws. These don't look like finger claws. They look like massive, massive, massive toe beans. So let's bring them back to more fingernail shape. Much better. The one hand still looked a little bulky at the end, but I still ended up much happier with it than I was before. I cleaned everything up with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. And then once that was dry, I used my gel polishes to make them sparkle just like the horns. Once they were cured, they got hit with top coat. Got to keep them sparkly. Of course, don't forget to do the undersides and the back claw. It took me a few minutes before I realized, oh, I forgot. That's still back there. Duh. Let's get that too. Then I repeated all of this on the finger claws. Much better. Now, there's a little length of wire still out from one horn that I decided I want to hang an orb from. Originally, I was also thinking about maybe doing a D&D die, but I decided that the orb looked better. I used a little bit of Polygel to fix it permanently into place and cured the Polygel. Then, taking out my e-file, I repeated the same process I did on the finger claws, just refined the shape of the Polygel at the base. Wiped it off with rubbing alcohol. And then I painted it with no wipe top coat. Cured it, and then followed that with some chameleon powder. Then I top coated it one last time and cured it for the last time. I like the color and how it came out with the chameleon powder. I mean, I could have gone way darker with it. It was just, I would have had to use a different kind of resin. I didn't want to wait for that to cure. Much better. A while back, Delightful put these same wing bones up on her Thingiverse for free. So I downloaded the files, printed them, and using this fabric made some wings for her. Introducing my ice dragon. Of course, there's no other name for her. We've got to call her Elsa. Due to the way that I made her, I decided hanging her was the best way to display her. I hope you enjoyed watching me make her. I certainly enjoyed every minute of it, although there was times I felt like I was really feeling super hard. Oh well, that just kind of happens in doll customizing sometimes, I guess. It's not always smooth sailing. Stay safe. What will you create today? See you soon. Bye.